Let's begin.
Good morning, and welcome to the Future of Diplomacy Projects event on Transatlantic Developments in Turkish Foreign Policy. And welcome to a snowy Boston day. It's great to see such a crowd here in a snowy day. My name is Ambassador Paula. I'm a PhD student here at Harvard Kennedy School. I'm doing political economy here. My focuses are mostly refugees in Turkey and Europe, and I'm trying to understand how media framing affects attitudes towards the refugees. And first, let me share with you some technical details. For those of you in the Zoom room, feel free to type your question in the Q&A box. Be aware that this session is being recorded, that your image may appear in the recording, and that we may post this video to the Belfer Center's website. While this event is on the record, the event organizers prohibit any attendees, including journalists, from audio visual recording and distributing parts or all of the event program without prior written authorization. Now, let me introduce our speakers. So it's my pleasure to welcome Sir Peter Westmacott to the Mercan School. Sir Peter was British Ambassador to the United States from 2012 until he retired from the UK diplomatic service in 2016. He spent a semester at Harvard Kennedy School of Government as a resident fellow. Sir Peter was British Ambassador to France from 2007 to 2012 and to Turkey from 2002 to 2006. His fourth-year diplomatic career included 4 years in Iran before the 1979 revolution. And it's also my pleasure to welcome Hasan Murat Mercan, Ambassador to Türkiye to the US. Ambassador Murat Mercan is both a diplomatic and a scholar. He graduated from the Department of Industrial Engineering, Boğaziçi University. He completed his PhD studies at the Department of Decision and Information Sciences of the University of Florida. He served as Deputy Minister of Energy and Natural Resources of Türkiye. In 2017, he was appointed as Turkish Ambassador to Japan and held this office until he assumed his duties as Ambassador of Türkiye to the US in March of 2021. Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, Senior Fellow with the Future of Diplomatic Project, will be moderating this discussion, and thank you. Looking forward to it.
Before you go, you have to say something.
Hoş geldiniz.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and just really welcome. We were a little nervous today about the program, given the weather, but we are very, very glad to welcome all of you. And I especially want to welcome both of the ambassadors and Ambassador Mercan. We're very much looking forward to hearing from you, as well as Ambassador Peter Westmacott. I want to begin with what you've been doing in Boston, because many Americans have been watching very intently on TV the very tragic situation that has befallen Turkey. I want you to know that our hearts have gone out to the Turkish people at this time. It just has been very, very disconcerting watching this tragedy unfold day by day by day. I understand you've been a few days in Boston, and there has been an outpouring of support for the Turkish people. Would you say a bit about this, about that, and also what is the situation presently as you see it with the earthquake, and what is taking place?
Thank you very much.
Welcome to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Paula. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here after a year and a half. So to answer your question, of course, this is the most devastating earthquake in the country for 200 years. And even before that, the earthquake was much more powerful. Its impact wasn't that much because there weren't that many people living in that area. There weren't that many high rises, manufacturing facilities and that sort of things. For that reason, its impact is huge, covering over 13.5 million people, left many people homeless, as well as many million people left the region and relocated to other parts of the country. Maybe Ahmed, you might want to study, internal migration between cities, because it's huge, and we really don't know how it's going to fall out other cities, other countries. So its impact is huge. Early stage was, to try to save lives through search and rescue teams. Many search and rescue teams came from all over the world. And the second stage was, of course, to maintain basic needs of the people, to provide them shelters, to provide them food at the initial stage, to provide them clothing, many things. So we are at that phase right now. Tents are being built, temporary shelters are being provided, basic facilities are being given, basic services given, as well as field hospitals from different countries. Two of them from the United States help people to get medicine, to get treatment, whatever whatever they need to have. And things are moving, but of course, I guess recovery period will take a longer time because of its impact. 40,000 houses completely, destroyed. Many more houses you cannot live there. So there are many things we need to do. And of course, I have to thank Boston area, the great area for their humanitarian aid that they poured in. And that is why I came early Saturday to thank Turkish-American communities on the way from New York. There were different Turkish-American communities. Some of them, boxed in-kind donations. There is a Turkish-American community all over the United States, came from Aviska. They are very good at transportation. They have thousands of trucks. So we use them for free. So I stopped by their places, and then I came here. There was a huge logistical center that all the donations gathered here, and volunteers. There were about 500 volunteers who sorted them out, packed them out, then put in pallets, and some of them sent to the Turkish airline because we have Turkish airline flights here, and some of the donations sent to New Jersey, Elizabeth Port, to be shipped from there to Türkiye. So it's been a very big logistical problem which we had to solve, and we were able to solve it. So far, across the country, we sent 1,600 tons of food, over maybe 3-4 million pounds of food all over the United States, from Los Angeles to Houston, Miami, whatever.
Well, I wanted to begin with this because, as I said, our hearts go out to the Turkish people. There's been a tremendous outpouring of support for you at this time of tragedy. As you mentioned, what happened is truly horrific and on such a scale that has not happened before. I also would like to mention, I know that our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, announced $100 million in aid and assistance that would go to Turkey and to Syria. But what has struck me here is not just Turkish-American. There's been just real support for you in this regard. So I wanted to begin that way. But let me maybe ask you, would you like to begin with saying a few general words yourself here? Please, because I have many questions to delve into. But since we're welcoming you back after, a year and a half, let's hear from you. What's on your mind?
Ambassador, I'm a former professor, former politician, and now an ambassador. You cannot stop me if I
Well, I could try to pull your microphone off.
Now, let me say a few words before we get into the details. And I'm sure, I would love to entertain your Q&A as well. Now, We are living in a world characterized by increasing uncertainties, crises, and conflicts. And I'm sure academia can help diplomacy to better respond to these challenges. Secretary Kissinger once rightly put, facts are rarely self-explanatory. Their significance, analysis, and interpretation depend on context and relevance. So I think we have to look into what's ahead of us in the future, in the near future, in the long future, and in the medium future. Now we are facing multi-dimensional geopolitical challenges, especially after the Ukrainian war erupted. Multiple transformations have been testing international setting, from the war in Ukraine to the international community's response to the recent earthquake in Mercan. We have seen different dynamics of international relations at active play. Regional and global issues are not diminishing, but becoming more and more entrenched. On the other hand, there are opportunities that we can all make use of better work and transatlantic alliance. So, as I understand, as I read the world, as I read the future going, I can easily conclude that we are going through an era of systematic transformation. Uncertainties and crises impact our lives. We see an emerging multipolar system. The voices of actors like India, Türkiye, Brazil, South Africa are increasing. We also witness the initial signs of a global bipolarity. We are facing a growing partnership between China and Russia. Meanwhile, the global south is also emerging. So, cut it short, geopolitics is returning in different forms. Tectonic plates in the global security system shift rapidly. Crises are multiplying in both quantity and variation. Great power competition, problems in international economy, as well as systematical threats inform and influence our discussions. A new international system and power structure are in the making. I feel like we are going through post-World War era where current status quo international order is being challenged. In this time of uncertainty, in this time of challenge, I think what we need as the Western Alliance are effective engagements to sustain our interest in semi-permissive and non-permissive environments. Regardless of the extent of soft or hard power we employ, adapting to these realities is a pressing necessity for all of us. And this is, in fact, how I look at the world. The world is changing. We have tectonic plates moving all over the places. And in this time of uncertainty, we need to empower our alliance. We need to cooperate, and we need to think and come up with new ideas in solving our problems. Because of our geostrategic location, Türkiye has always been under spotlight in the last century. Anatolia is once again emerging as one of the centers of new geopolitics, as had been in the previous century. This is probably the curse of geography. The world's hotspots like Middle East, Black Sea, included newly, Mediterranean, Caucasus, Balkans, Russia, Ukraine, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, are all in our vicinity and our interest. This situation is also valid for immediate files like energy security, especially natural gas, providing natural gas to European countries. Migration management, again, we are in the middle of it. And fight against terrorism, we are also in the middle of it. So, in this regard, Turkey has to follow a proactive foreign policy. This is not a matter of choice, but a necessity. When it comes to Turkish-American relations, I'm gonna skip some of the ideas that I have for the Q&A. When it comes to Turkish-American relations, given the current conjuncture, where we have to revisit realpolitik, neither Turkey nor the United States cannot accommodate divergence in bilateral relations. Two factors are paramount in these difficult times. One, keeping our partnership and solidarity strong, and two, strengthening support to allies and partners. I'm sure you will disagree with me that Turkey proves to be a vital actor in many of foreign policy concerns. In fact, who else could do diplomatic balancing that Turkey operates in different parts of the world? Take a look at Libya, Caucasus, Syria, Balkans, Central Asia, and even with the Russian and Ukrainian conflict. This cannot be substituted or subcontracted to any other state or non-state actor in Greater Eurasia. Of course, Turkey and United States cannot agree on every issue. However, mutual and long-term geopolitical interests should not be taken hostage for short-term domestic political motives either. And obviously, it takes two to tango. Partnership is a two-way relationship based on equality, empathy, and mutual respect. We have to see the greater good that a close cooperation between Türkiye and the US could produce. And I'm a strong believer of either we will win-win together or we will lose together. If the partnership is empowered, is increased, if the cooperation between the two countries enhances, then we will all win. If we focus on our divergences and our differences, I'm sure that no one will be winner, and we will probably lose in varying magnitude. Now, of course, Turkey and United States have strategic mechanism at this backdrop. There has been bilateral dialogue at the leadership level. Secretary Blinken and Çavuşoğlu meet every often. President Biden and Erdogan talks over the phone on different occasions. Of course, we have differences, but we have to learn global issues, regional issues together to reach to common ground. Of course, we are a NATO member country, and being a NATO member country is important, especially in this time of difficulties. And being partner within NATO and empowering NATO member countries also important, very important. On top of it, we have energy crisis, energy dilemma that's emerging, especially after Russia-Ukrainian war. And this energy crisis again puts Turkey in the spotlight, especially in providing, diversifying energy resources for European countries. So let me stop here because there are a lot of things I want to say, but I want to leave it to Q&A. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Ambassador, thank you. I am going to ask you just one follow-up question, and then I do want to go to Ambassador Westmacott to get his reaction as the former ambassador to Turkey and also former ambassador to the United States, to France. I want to get his reaction to your opening remarks. But let me ask you a specific question. Share with us one or two of your ideas. You mentioned you have a few, one or two ideas. You leave it to Q&A. What do you think are some new ways forward? You've mentioned the importance of the partnership, the need for the recognition of how geopolitics has shifted. Are there some things that you think the United States and Turkey, or you can take my question even more broad-based, what are the thoughts that you think that Turkey can be engaged in this changed environment?
Look, my concern not as an ambassador, but as a man, as a person, is that we are going through very difficult, unpredictable era of international relations whose impact could be widespread. Now, when for instance, we had problem within the Middle East, it's contained in there. But now with the emerging Russia-Ukrainian crisis, it is global impact. And then we have, China with conflict or competition, how you refer it, is also emerging. Now, in this time of uncertainty, of course, I'm not going to prophesize what might happen, but bad things can happen. Because think about just a few months before World War II erupted. So my concern is, first, we have to prevent this to happen mutually together. We should do everything at our disposal to make things work and to create an environment which might lead to unexpected consequences. And secondly, of course, at the same time, to create peace and stability in the region of our concerns. So these are two paradigms, I think, very important. For that reason, I think, crisis in the Caucasus, Turkish-Armenian, Turkish-Azerbaijan, Armenian-Azerbaijan, crisis in the Middle East, crisis between Turkey and Greece, Türkiye and Greece. We have to approach these problems from this perspective rather than repeating our own our own rhetoric. So I think we have to come up with new ideas to strengthen stability in the region, stability within the countries, and to try to create interdependency between countries so that negative consequences will not happen.
Right. Well, thank you for that. Ambassador Westmacott, would you give your reaction to the ambassador's opening remarks? And then I want to dig a bit deeper, and one of the topics I'm going to begin with is Ukraine, because you also mentioned that. Yes.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks for having us both, and it's a great honor and pleasure to be with my old friend Murat Mercan.
And also welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Kennedy's
I
School.
spent a few months here after I finished my career as a British diplomat. But my first ambassadorship was indeed in Turkey, where Murat Bey and I, 20 years ago, became good friends. So I'm thrilled to see him and Ece, his wife, here today. So it's a rather special moment. And I think, if I may say so, it is very good for the United States and it's very good for Turkey to have as ambassador here somebody who goes back with such deep roots into the foundation of the AK Party, has the full trust and confidence of his president and the ministers of the Turkish government. That's not always true, speaking as a professional diplomat around the world, that you have quite that relationship of trust with your political bosses. But I know it to be true in the case of Murat. So I think it's a very good thing, and it's a very complicated and difficult time, and therefore important that Türkiye should be so well represented here in the United States. Just a couple of points, Paula, if I may. First of all, I'd like just to associate myself with your comments about the terrible tragedy of the earthquakes, I should say, in Gaziantep, Antakya, Adana, Adıyaman area. Absolutely appalling. The response, I think, around the world has been quite remarkable. We've got field hospitals there as well, the United Kingdom government, and even British population at a time where we have a cost of living crisis in the UK and a number of other difficulties. When I last looked, more than £100 million have been voluntarily given by private citizens, in addition to the support that the government is doing. And I think that sense of shared responsibility and caring for the people of Turkey has been reflected around the world. I think it's called the sympathy and the imagination of all of us, and we wish you well and your colleagues well, of course, in trying to deal with the consequences. We all know people, I know a lot of people, Turkish friends who've lost family members, businesses, homes, and everything in that area. So I do hope you're able to get over it soon, and we will all be cheering for Turkey as you address the cleanup process. I think on the policy questions, Ambassador, that you mentioned, there's 2 or 3 points that strike me. First of all, and I know you want to come back to Ukraine, but let me just put out my little question. There's quite a lot of stuff in the international media, Wall Street Journal and others lately, about Turkey's unique position, not just because of all the difficult neighbors it's got in the region where it is, but there it is, next door to Russia and Ukraine, the other side of the Black Sea, NATO member, good links to all of those players, which is itself quite an achievement. But you're not one of the international community that sanctions Russia as a result of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And my understanding is there hasn't been a huge amount of pressure on Turkey to do that, precisely because you are there and you are able to talk to both sides. You have been instrumental, Türkiye, in getting grain exports resumed and in making a number of other moves in the direction of perhaps trying to bring to an end the conflict. So I think my question to you, Murat, would be, what is your reply to those who say, but Turkey is not sanctioning and is doing lots more trade and business with Russia than other countries, some of which are, of course, taking advantage of the fact that Turkey does not sanction Russia in order to facilitate their own exports and trade with Russia. So what is it that Turkey, because of its special position and not sanctioning the players, is able to do that perhaps brings closer the moment when this horrible conflict might come to an end? So that's one question. The second question is back to NATO for a moment. I mean, Turkey, the most easternmost member of the NATO alliance, second largest standing army, hugely important, big NATO bases in Izmir, big United States military base at Incirlik, next door to a lot of problem countries that Turkey knows better than anybody, and directly affected by some of the things that go wrong in countries like Iraq and Syria. We should all remember that Turkey plays host to 4 million refugees from Syria as a result of the consternation in that country. How many other countries could do that so generously, if you like, in the same way that Turkey has? So there we are, Turkey, very important NATO member on the eastern flank. But there is now a debate about enlargement. And Türkiye is not yet agreed to Finland and Sweden, who are understandably, given what Putin has been up to in Ukraine, saying that they would like to join the alliance. Türkiye has a number of concerns. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit, Murat, where is that debate going to? Do you think it can be resolved? What does the alliance, or what do the applicant members need to do to reassure Turkey that this would be the right thing to do to allow those 2 additional member states, which of course feel that they're a bit close to Russia for comfort, to join into our alliance? And then the other thing, which I suspect is on quite a lot of people's minds, is that despite the horror of the earthquakes, we are coming up for elections in Turkey. So is Turkey going to have elections in May or in June, or might they be deferred? There are different legal procedures I know that have to be gone through if you are to change the date. I think it was June. The president has said that he thinks May might make more sense. But my word, Turkey has got other things to worry about at the moment rather than putting together the necessary logistics for Turkey's parliamentary and presidential elections. And I wonder if you'd like to say something to us about how you think the coming months and the electoral timetable is going to play out. So those were a few points which were on my mind and prompted partly by hearing what the ambassador had to say, but partly also things that I'm wondering about in the context of Turkey.
I was going to say the ambassador stole my thunder in terms of questions. Now you have 3 questions there. On Ukraine, you took exactly the question that I was going to delve into. So we have Ukraine, NATO, and the upcoming election. Over to you.
Now, first of all, on the issue of Ukraine, as Peter emphasized, while he's one of the best ambassadors served in Turkey among the British diplomatic corps, and we knew each other and his wife well, we spent a lot of time in discussing these issues in the time of peace, long time ago, when Turkey was about to become EU member. Now, regarding the sanctions, Turkey's position vis-à-vis any sanction that's being implemented right now is so long Türkiye is not part of an organization who decided to make sanctions. Türkiye is not part of this sanction. Since Türkiye is, for instance, if Türkiye were an EU member, I think Türkiye would have implemented all the sanctions EU imposed. Or if, for instance, Türkiye, I mean, if United Nations impose sanctions on Ukraine, on Russia, Türkiye would have implemented that as well. Or if, for instance, Council of Europe, that Turkey is part of, then Türkiye would implement this sanctions. Secondly, we have been very clear on the fact that though we are not going to be part of sanctions, but we are not going to be used to bypass the sanctions, so to circumvent the sanctions. In that regard, as far as I know, Turkey, and relevant authorities work very closely to have this mechanism work. For that reason, until now, not many Turkish companies have been sanctioned, have been penalized. However, there are some other countries, companies have been sanctioned. So, I think on the issue of sanctions, there is a good coordination and cooperation between sanctioning authorities, whether it's EU or United States or UK, as a matter of fact, and Türkiye not to circumvent the sanctions. On the NATO enlargement issue, from the very beginning, we have open door NATO policy. And this has been the case not only with Ukraine, not only with Sweden and Finland, for others as well. And even before, some of the NATO member countries have some reservations regarding some NATO memberships. The new NATO memberships we have never blocked. And also considering the fact that NATO membership of Macedonia took so many years just because of blockade of another country. Now, Türkiye has major concerns with its relations with Sweden and Finland, and as a matter of fact, some months ago, signed an MOU, trilateral MOU between Türkiye, Finland, and Sweden. And we said that once this MOU is met, or the articles in that MOU is satisfactorily met, Türkiye will not refrain from ratifying Sweden and Finland membership. I think we are at that point. As far as I know, Turkish government officials have been saying that Sweden must be certain obligations. Still, they're financing the PKK terrorism, and as yesterday, one of the Swedish intelligence officer said that major financing to PKK, which is terrorist organization, is still being provided to Sweden. So that is what had been said. When you look at the MOU article, you would see that the articles of the MOU, you would see that many of these articles haven't been made by Sweden yet. Now, on the issue of Finland, there's another story. There's much less problem with Finland, and both foreign minister and president clearly stated that the Finland membership is not a big problem. It's not a problem issue. It's not an issue at all. So we'll see what they decide to be member at the same time. So this is an ongoing negotiation.
May I insert
Yes.
this question? In the case of Sweden, do you think that that issue will come to a resolution? You described where it is, but do you think there's the prospect from your standpoint when we come to a resolution?
Look, I think these articles clearly state what is expected from the Swedish government. And Swedish government with good intention made some changes in their constitution, and they will implement their laws coming June. So there's a good progress, but we're not there yet. Once these expectations are met, I'm sure Sweden will be a member as well. Regarding the elections, Peter, I am smart enough not to comment on any domestic policy matters, because whatever you say, you may end up being wrong. And also, I'm here for bilateral relations, for international matters. So please allow me to refrain from answering the question of elections.
Let me dive back to Ukraine if I can. I have a question on Ukraine and also interrelated with NATO. Two questions on Ukraine. Turkey has played certainly earlier on in terms of the humanitarian corridor. Turkey hosted a number of meetings at the foreign minister level, and then also as Ambassador Westmacott had mentioned specifically your role in brokering the agreement relative and related to grain and the grain exports. Let me ask you, what do you see as unfolding with regard to Ukraine? That question always comes forward. What defines success? What do you think is the right way forward? You mentioned in your opening comments your concern about, you didn't use the word escalation, but you expressed concern about conflict becoming much more broad and global. You referenced, wars, world wars. So in that context, what do you define as success here? And on NATO, should Ukraine become a member of NATO?
Look, on the issue of Ukraine, our position is very clear. Long before many European countries didn't comment on Ukraine's territorial integrity back in 2014, we've been supporting Ukrainian territorial integrity, including Crimea, Donbass, all the regions as well. So we still support.
Including Crimea, I believe. Erdogan.
Dear ambassadors, could you speak up, please? Thank you.
Okay, now Turkey's position on Ukraine is very clear. Turkey has been supporting Ukrainian territorial integrity even before many countries haven't commented on anything after 2014, including Donbass, Crimea, or all that is being internationally recognized, UN recognized border. So this is one thing. Secondly, the war to Ukraine is unfair, and our contribution is very clear on this conflict. Of course, probably I will not talk about all the details. I cannot talk about all the details. But there is one thing which is very important. On any conflict, there has to be a channel of communication between conflicting parties. Whether it's Russia and Ukraine, whether it's Yemen, or Palestine, Israel, many others. There has to be some kind of communication channel. Initially, these communication channels might not lead to anything, as in the case of Ukraine, for instance. Initially, right after the war erupted, there has been several talks in Istanbul and in Antalya between the parties, but that didn't lead to anywhere, and the war increased and escalated. I don't think that it will go down and it will come to an end so easily. So in terms of victory, I think, I don't know how you define victory. Now, for myself, as a human, victory is the time where every member of Ukrainians live in their homeland freely, happily, without any concern. So this conflict seems to be longing for a while. I don't know where the parties will come to negotiation table, but we all know one thing. First, there has to be a communication channel between the two parties. And secondly, its impact in the global economy. Globally, its impact is lesser than before. That is why we initiated, for instance, grain deal. If we weren't grain deal, we would probably, buying our breads much higher prices, or we would be feeding our animals or whatever much higher prices. Especially the situation would have been much worse in Africa, in many other countries. So, and at the same time, we have to maintain energy resources flowing, impact. So long we minimize the impact of war to non-fighting countries, it's successful. So I'm not quite sure whether we are able to define success. In what way? Of course, we want, for instance, Ukraine to regain its territorial integrity, to get its lands back, including Crimea, I'm saying. But whether it's possible, it's doable, I don't know. The experts will comment on this, will make research, will make analysis. I don't know when there will be negotiation starting, all these things are up in the air. So the current situation is, I believe, Türkiye is doing a lot on her part, given the fact that, Türkiye is energy dependent across the country. We provide our hydrocarbon energy supply for 90% from export, import. So we don't have energy, but given all these facts, Türkiye has been doing its part in supporting, NATO, and at the same time maintaining a communication channel so that one time, if parties decide to come together for peace negotiation, there will be an actor who can facilitate this.
And what about Ukraine in NATO? I'm sure speaking in this mic. What about Ukraine in NATO? What about your Turkey's view on that?
Now, as I said, Türkiye has an open door policy, including, Sweden, Finland, and also, other countries like Georgia, many other countries. NATO has certain criteria. So each country has to meet certain criteria. As it stands right now, so long there is conflict in Ukraine, there is war in Ukraine. I'm not quite sure whether any country would support Ukrainian membership in NATO. Let's see once the war is over, once this conflict is over. At that time, I'm sure each country will make its own decision regarding Ukrainian membership. But now it's impossible for any member country to accept NATO membership of Ukraine.
I have two more questions, and we're going to open it up soon for all of you and also for those online. But Ambassador Westmacott, let me come back to you. Would you like to comment on this issue of Ukraine? The UK has been very engaged, very active, certainly in providing military equipment assistance and taking other strong positions. Would you like to comment on that? Because two topics I want to go to before we go to our colleagues here in the room. I want to ask you about China and also about Iran. But I thought I'd lay that marker down maybe before you go to it.
Okay, I won't go in that territory. Just a brief comment, thank you. I don't think there's much to add to what Murat has said, and he's very clearly the important role that Türkiye plays in the whole process of using channels of communication open and trying to make a difference. I would just say a couple of points. It seems to me, as former British diplomat, but now just an independent figure, that following the early months of the conflict, of the invasion, when people were impressed by how well the Ukrainians had done, surprised by how badly the Russian military performed, and to some extent shocked by the fact that Putin did what he did, having lied through his teeth and saying he wasn't going to do it, there was nevertheless a sense that, how can Ukraine really hang in there against the monolith of Russia, such an enormous country with such massive armed forces? And it was a question of time. I think that over the months, and we're now first anniversary of this terrible event, the general mood internationally has altered. I think people have begun to say, you know what, Putin isn't doing very well. He's not going to escalate to use nuclear weapons. Most people seem to feel that's less and less likely. And there is just a chance that the Ukrainians might be able to fight back and regain the sovereignty of their own territory, as the ambassador was saying. I don't think a lot of the international community thought that was very likely a few months back, but I think the mood has shifted. And part of that is because I think much of the international community is now stepping up to the plate with more and more defensive military equipment that the Ukrainians want in order to stay in the game. They're short of ammunition, they're short of artillery shells, they're short of drones. Turkey is actually helping with some remarkable Bayraktar drones, but a lot of other countries are now helping Ukraine stay alive, stay afloat, fight back. And of course, there is a difference when you've got a people which is fighting for the survival of their country against an invading occupier, largely staffed by conscripts who barely know which country they're in, poorly equipped, poorly trained, poorly motivated. It's not surprising in some ways that the Ukrainians are doing such a good job. So I think where we are now, 1 year on, is the mood, I think, of those who are watching this closely is shifting a bit. Begin to think that this might not end in defeat, it might not end in even occupation by Russia of parts of Ukraine. But there's also a rather depressing thought that this could go on for a while yet. Because however the rest of us objectively might think that Putin is doing and the Russian armed forces are doing, there's no evidence whatever President Putin himself is ready to back off or sit down and have a sensible negotiation on the sort of terms that President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people could contemplate. So we're in it for the longish haul, and that's why I think it is very important that the international community should continue to support the Ukrainians as long as they wish to stand up for themselves and defend their sovereign right against the illegal invader. But I think the mood has shifted, and I think that's a rather important point. I just leave it at that.
Thank you for that very much. Ambassador Mercan, if I may, I wanted to ask you about China and Iran. On China, let me connect it to Ukraine. There's a very unusual situation. You have, of course, you mentioned it yourself, the enhanced relationship between Russia and China. You also have now reports, the head of our intelligence agency, Bill Burns, just came out and made some comments about whether the Chinese are looking at giving arms to the Russians and supporting. I believe he was quoted in the press along those lines. And then there's also the issue of their 10-point plan that the Chinese just have come forward and said, look, we feel here's a 10-point plan to try to bring about some negotiation. How do you see China and China's role, not only relevant to Ukraine, but how does Turkey see China's role globally today?
That question, I'm not quite sure whether international community is a clear strategy vis-a-vis China is concerned. And so is Turkey. Turkey has economic ties, tendency between China and Turkey. We usually buy more than we sell. So trade deficit with China is huge. But at the same time, China is very powerful. We have our own concerns regarding Uyghur issue in China. So, China-Turkish relationship is not that strategic. It's mutually economically beneficial, and at the same time we retain our differences. So probably the only place where we have less say in the international fora is emerging China, because we don't have that strong economic power to challenge China. So I don't think that's where he can play a role to challenge China in its emerging power. Its relation with China is based on mutual interests. We have differences, especially when it comes to Uyghur issue, and we express our differences on all international fora. So our view on China is, China is China, and you have to deal with them. You have to develop a relation with China based on mutual interests. How much is possible? That's another question. But the concern that I have, personally speaking, is whether international community has a clear policy towards China. Now, at one hand, in immense economic tie with China, which makes China China, especially in terms of these, trade with China. But on the other hand, there's Taiwan issue. So that's a confusion. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't have a clear vision and perspective on that matter. In terms of China-Russia relationship, now, of course, if the war continues and Russia starts providing weapons from China, then that's why I raised the issue of exploding the conflict beyond Ukraine-Russia crisis. Is it possible? I don't know. But I know one thing, that's not good. It's not going to be good. But sometimes you can't prevent things from happening. For that matter, we have to be very, very concerned. We have to engage with China. We have to talk with them. Not, I say we, but Americans especially, because they see it very challenging China issue. So they have to talk with them. They have to engage the Chinese government. I don't know whether they will be successful or not. The time will only show. Now let me tell you about Iran. Again,
may I just make one comment before you go to Iran? If I may, the reason I wanted your view on China is to remind the ambassador was also Turkey's ambassador to Japan, and you know the region very well. And it's been very striking to me when the ambassador opened, he mentioned the changes, the geopolitical changes. There's a real shift in Japan these days, and it's triggered by a number of factors, and including even, I'm going to say, the issue of how U.S. leadership is perceived internationally or not. Japan is now investing much more in its own defense, and it's rather significant in terms of that course of action. So that's why, especially, I wanted to hear your view on China, because you've also seen it, not just only from sitting, in Turkey and the United States, but also from Japan.
In Japan, of course, a major concern of Japanese political elite, as well as regular ordinary people, is China, and this policy regarding China and their self-defense force has been, increasing its power and its capacity for a long time. And there's always this debate of, whether they change the constitution, they made amendment in the constitution, but they never achieve it. But it's not going to prevent Japan to invest in defense, increasing its defense capability. Now, of course, Japan-Chinese relationship is also like, dual relationship. But I shouldn't say perfect, excellent economic relations, cooperation. There are many Chinese companies, there are many Japanese companies operating in China, and vice versa. Huge economic trade between the two countries. At the same time, there is this challenging of, geopolitical challenge between the two countries. And given this equation, I don't know whether there is any feasible strategy toward China. I honestly don't know. I exert all my brain cells to find some kind of glimpse of hope for this dichotomy. I couldn't find it.
Well, I'm glad you commented because I think you have a unique perspective on this. But Iran, what is your view on Iran and your vision of the region? Because Iran is a major challenge, to say the least.
Well, from our perspective, since we don't have nuclear weapon, we don't want any country in our region to develop nuclear weapon, period. And this is a nice word. One of the strategies implemented by European Union as well as United States is to isolate and sanction Iran. Apparently, it only penalized and hurted other people. And if we relied on the reports coming out, it didn't prevent Iran developing processing towards their objective, their aim. JCPOA was a good framework for negotiation and for dealing with Iran. That was cancelled by Trump administration. Now, during Biden administration, talks again started after the Ukrainian war. That stalled again. Now, of course, as a country which is in the region and always in competition in the region with Iran, historically speaking, of course, we want successful implementation of JCPOA. Whether we will get there is anybody's question. Look, saying nice words won't solve the problems. In terms of the regional issues, for me, stability in the region is absolute importance. We have to have stability, one form or the other. For that reason, for instance, Turkey has initiated its relationship with Israel, which is very important for the stability in the region. With Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and today or yesterday, Egyptian foreign minister was visiting Türkiye. With Greece, after the earthquake, we have this nice earthquake diplomacy. Iranian prime minister visited Türkiye for the earthquake, which is not foreign minister, not prime minister. So there is now the opportunity, new opportunity for the region after the earthquake, which we must invest. Whether it will lead to any solution, we're going to have to see.
By the way, please, for those that would like to ask questions, we have a microphone over here. If you would get up and proceed to the microphone. And I think we will check, Erica, I think there were maybe not at this time for any questions. So please, you would be invited. While you're doing that, I'm going to go to you, Ambassador Westmacott. Just if you'd like to, on these few questions and points on China or Iran, if you'd like to say anything. And then we'll go to you, okay?
Thank you. I just make a couple of brief points. I think on China, I agree with Murat that I think it is not clear at the moment.
Can you hear, by the way, back here, the microphone?
It's
So it's just, it's.
it's not clear. I can speak like this.
Whether the international community as a whole, or even the, if you like, the liberal democracies, have got a unified position. There is a school of thought going around that the way in which China has given qualified, but nevertheless clear diplomatic support to Russia with the invasion of Ukraine has in some ways reduced the difference in the way in which other countries regard China internationally. I think there may be something in that, though I wouldn't go too far in that direction. America, having been part of a process which gave China something of a free ride in terms of WTO and developing nation status, which China exploited to build up its great prosperity, has kind of woken up to the fact that China is eating its lunch, as a number of other countries, and so we are now beginning to place collectively certain restrictions on transfers of technology, where it is totally one-sided and where China is using that technology imported from other countries to exploit and to some extent place itself in an offensive, sometimes cyber offensive position through technology to exercise control over businesses, activities, infrastructure, and all sorts of other elements of national life in other countries. So people are getting nervous about that. America perhaps a bit more than others, but I think other countries are also following suit and want to try to manage that part of the relationship with China better. At the same time, we all know that China, I would say unlike Russia, has every interest in the global economy continuing to thrive. They own something like $1.5 trillion of dollar debt. They have no interest in the American or Western capitalist economy collapsing. They would like to dominate it. They want to be a bigger player. But whereas I sometimes think that Mr. Putin doesn't really mind how many people lose their lives and how many countries lose their prosperity in pursuit of his vision of restoring the Russian Empire, I think China is more pragmatic. And that gives us, I think, opportunities to engage with China, although we need to be careful that China is not imposing its own terms of trade, if you like, on the rest of us without qualification. So I think there are opportunities there. And the one thing about Ukraine that I would say is that it's been clear to us all, I think, since the very beginning, that if there is one individual who can have an influence on President Putin, both in terms of non-escalation to the use of nuclear weapons, and possibly in terms of getting to a point where we can have the beginning of a negotiation, which has to require China's withdrawal from occupied sovereign Ukrainian territory, it is Xi Jinping. And we have seen Xi Jinping exercise, I think, that responsibility. We've seen China come up with a tentative plan, which does not include withdrawal from occupied sovereign Ukrainian territory, but is nevertheless got enough in it for President Zelensky to say, well, there's some interesting points there, maybe we can do something with the Chinese proposals. So it's not a bad sign, and I think what it does tell us is that China is not very comfortable with this conflict going on indefinitely, and not very comfortable with being perceived to be entirely on Russia's side. So I think that's something for us to work on and engage with.
Thank you for that comment. I'm gonna let Sid go to the question, if that's okay. We'll come back to Iran. Why don't you ask, let's get you in on your question. I like to mix it up here.
Please, thank you. First
Please
of all,
introduce yourself.
perfect. Yes, first of all, Ambassador Mercan, başınız sağ olsun. We're also sorry for the loss that you and Türkiye have suffered and grateful for your work to mobilize support here in the US as well. My name is Andrew Donahue. I'm a PhD student in political science here at Harvard. I think that Ambassadors Dobriansky and Westmacott have been appropriately diplomatic, but I just wanted you to know, I think many Americans feel upset about ways in which Türkiye is supporting Russia's war effort. The Wall Street Journal, as you know, has reported that Russian rifle makers and companies have received tens of millions in exports of electronics and other materials from Türkiye. Mevlut Çavuşoğlu denies this and says that Turkey is not doing that. So I wanted to ask you, is Türkiye's policy that electronics and other goods should not be exported to Russian arms makers, and what can change in the coming months in Türkiye's stance towards Russia and its war effort.
Turkey doesn't produce electronics.
Sorry, these are American electronics that are being exported by Türkiye to Russia.
Well, then Americans must concern more on this issue as much as Turkey is. Look, I know the situation, but since we are in camera, probably I'll answer your question later on. Look, let me repeat what I said. Turkey is not going to allow sanctions to be circumvented by Russia, and we cooperate closely with American institutions. Every now and then there is visit to Turkey by Treasury and other American officials. So on that issue, I know the exact what the problem is, but I'm not going to tell you because we don't manufacture electronics. Okay, that's all I said, but I'll tell you later on more in-depth analysis.
Thank you. And by the way, please, if there are other questions, I am
want
going to
hear
go
what
to Iran.
Pete has to say about you.
I will, but if there are other questions, please do come up. Iran. Like I said, I'm mixing it up because by the time we walk up, so we'll catch you in a moment. Ambassador.
Iran, I mean, as the ambassador was just saying, we've got to the stage now after the destruction of JCPOA by President Trump. Iran is moving towards more and more clearly towards a breakout capacity for nuclear weapons. They're now at 84% enrichment level, and you need 90% to make a bomb. Add a bit of time for the weaponization of that enriched uranium. It looks as though if he wanted to go down that route, and I emphasize the if, Iran is not very far away from having a nuclear weapons capability. Personally, I'm still not sure that that is what the Iranian government wants to do, regardless of whether they're saying that they do or don't want to. Of course, they've always said it's un-Islamic to have nuclear weapons. There's plenty of evidence that they're moving in that direction. I sometimes wonder whether it's to scare the rest of us and to keep Iran the center of attention, rather than because they intend to make nuclear weapons. But we are all right to keep a very close eye on it. I think it's a great pity that the JCPOA is no longer in place. It didn't work as well as it should have done in that it was not able to encourage a lot of other countries to trade with and invest in and free up frozen assets of Iran, as the Iranians expected, because although international sanctions were suspended as part of the JCPOA, unilateral American sanctions remained in place, and a lot of international companies with assets in the world of the dollar were kind of scared of transgressing US sanctions law by going into business in Iran. And that meant that the benefits were more limited than they might have been. Nevertheless, they were sticking with it, the rest of us were sticking with it, and it was only President Trump who decided that he would tear it up. I have to say, in part, I suspect because it was the flagship diplomatic achievement of his predecessor. But I think that was a great shame, and we are now, therefore, in a more difficult position. Where do we go from here? I mean, the negotiations are not, I think, going well. Maybe they don't even exist at all. I have the impression that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is not very interested in better relations with the rest of the world. One of my academic friends who studies Iran, who is Iranian, says there's three pillars that hold up the Iranian regime: death to America, death to Israel, and repression of women. And if any one of those three pillars begins to collapse, the regime begins to collapse. So they've got to keep hating Israel, blaming America, attacking America, and if not America, then the rest of us. And they're pretty scared also, being married to an Iranian who was there during the revolution and got arrested. They're pretty scared of women, as we see in the way in which the reaction to Mahsa Amini's death has shown. What are they scared of? I still don't fully understand. But the fact that half the population of Iran is treated so badly, it's not quite as bad as women in Afghanistan, which is absolutely horrendous, but it's pretty bad. And there's a lot of very young men as well who realize this is not the right direction of travel for Iran. But there isn't much sign of any improved relations either with the rest of the world or reform domestically, which I think could unleash a whole lot of improvements and a better life for the people of Iran. And I'm sorry to say, rather unoriginally, but I think this has got a lot to do with the fact that powers that be, not least the IRGC, are more interested in staying in control and in some cases enriching themselves because there's a big black market and a lot of people in power that make a lot of money out of it, than they are in doing what is right for the people of Iran, which is why there is so much discontent and unhappiness. But I cannot give you any reason at the moment for hope in thinking that it's going to go in the right direction. The Shah lost his throne in part because he wasn't prepared to slaughter any more of his own people to keep in power. These people, it seems to me, are prepared to do almost anything to stay in power. And so for the time being, unless that changes or until that changes, it's hard to see what's going to change. And I don't see much scope personally for outside powers intervening in any way that's going to facilitate or promote regime change. We've all tried that in different places and it usually doesn't work.
Thank you for that. Let's take your question, and we'll be wrapping up after this. We'll take the question and then just any final comments. Please, and if you'll introduce yourself.
Good morning, I'm Jacob Drashina. I'm an HKS student here. And Ambassador Mercan, I'm very sorry about the recent events in Türkiye. I wanted to mention you started out with your remarks about the changing tectonics in the Middle East regionally, globally. And as we've been discussing here in the Middle East, you mentioned ideas for regional stability. That's the utmost importance. So I'm wondering, in light of the Abraham Accords in 2020 and warming relations between Turkey and Israel, what are perhaps one or two ideas that you do have for that regional stability? What does that specifically look like? Thank you.
Is there any other question?
No, I think we're also come to the almost, we're going to spill over a little bit to close it.
Okay.
So if you'd answer the question and any other final points you'd like to make.
First of all, thank you very much. Regarding Turkish-Israeli relationship, they've been very important in the past. Now, since let's say last year, with President Herzog's visit and communicate with President Erdogan, we made an important stride between the two countries. Despite the fact that we have differences sometimes with some of the government officials regarding Palestinian issue, though we support two-state Palestinian two-state solution in the region, some politicians may disagree with it. But cooperation and dialogue between two countries is important. One of the first and most important cooperation between the two countries is regarding Middle East, East Med Energy Corridor. This East Med Energy Corridor, without Turkey's presence, is almost impossible to implement unless you refer to LNG or unless you produce LNG and sell it to EU. But LNG is not competitive. Producing LNG in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean, is not competitive comparing Qatari LNGs as well as Algerian LNGs. And you always need some sort of pipeline energy. It has to be diversified. So in that regard, I'm sure that Türkiye will have to play a key role in terms of additional diversified route to Europe, pipeline route to Europe when it comes to gas coming out of Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean. Other issues like we have major concerns in fighting terrorism in the region. Some malign actors could play a role. So there is always cooperation or potential cooperation between the two countries. Economically, two countries' economic cooperation has always been very good, despite during the bad times, bilateral bad times. So I'm optimistic. The more dialogue we have, the better understanding between the peoples in the region, especially when it comes to this, religious divide between different religions. Turkey, as a Muslim society, predominantly Muslim society, has always had good relations with the Jews for over 500 years. And this might be a good model for other communities as well. I'm optimistic on this. Finally, Paula, I'm very happy, very excited to be here. So I didn't get a chance to be a student at Harvard, but I got a chance to speak at Harvard, so I'm gonna put it in my resume. I taught at Harvard. Thank you very much.
I would just say in closing, ambassadors, we're very delighted to have both of you, and both of you are back. But Ambassador Mercan, especially, thank you very, very much for coming, for giving your global perspective. And it was a real treat also having your good friend and my good friend and the Kennedy School's friend, Ambassador Westmacott, come. And also, I also want to say it was delightful to have also your wife here today and your team. So let's give the ambassador another round of applause.